The Zapirian survey ship, Luminous Inquiry, drifted through the dead system, its crystalline hull shimmering with faint bioluminescence as it absorbed the dim light of a dying star. Commander Zapkel stood at the observation deck, his four jointed fingers resting against the translucent panel. The view outside was a graveyard, planets cracked open like discarded shells, their cores long since mined dry. This was Sector Phi X, the so-called Forbidden Zone, a place whispered about in the archives of the Galactic Concord, a warning etched into every navigational database. Do not approach, do not scan, do not wake what sleeps here. Zapkel's crest of sensory filaments rippled in unease. The stories were old, older than the Concord itself. Legend spoke of a war so ancient that even the Zapirians, with their meticulously preserved histories, only knew it in fragments. A war against them, the humans. Commander. Scientist Quilex, voice pulsed through the ship's organic comm system, its tone vibrating with restrained excitement. We've located the vault. Zapkel's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, a reflexive gesture of apprehension. The vault was supposed to be a myth, a final relic of a dead species, sealed away by their own kind before extinction. The Concord had debated for centuries whether it even existed, and now they had found it. The vault was a monolith, not a structure, not a ship, just a single seamless slab of black alloy, drifting in the void like a tombstone. No markings, no seams, no visible technology. It was utterly inert, absorbing scans like light into a singularity. Quilex's crystalline appendages twitched as he adjusted the inquiry's sensors. No energy signatures, no emissions, it's just there. Zapkel exhaled through his respiratory vents. Then how do we open it? A pause. Then, from the depths of the ship's databanks, a whisper of old code, something the Concord had recovered from a ruined human outpost millennia ago. A single phrase, untranslatable, yet preserved. Quilex hesitated, then pulsed the command through the comms. Echo protocol, verify. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the vault woke. Light bled from the edges of the monolith. Not the soft blue-green glow of Zapirian tech, but a harsh, searing white. The alloy peeled apart like liquid, revealing an interior that defied physics, a space far larger than the exterior should have allowed. And inside, not derelicts, not ancient husks, active warships, sleek, angular, their hulls scorched from battles, no living being remembered. At their center, a command vessel, its prow marked with faded insignia, UNS Vindication. Zapkel's entire body locked in primal terror. Because the humans weren't extinct, they had been waiting. And now, after 10,000 years of silence, their systems were powering up. Quilex's voice was barely a whisper. Commander, what have we done? Zapkel had no answer. Somewhere in the dark, deep within the Vindication's core, a single light flickered to life. A human voice, rough with disuse, crackled over an open frequency. Identify, the last human wasn't the last after all. And the galaxy was about to remember why that was a problem. The silence that followed the human voice was absolute. Zapkel's crystalline fingers hovered over the command console, frozen mid-motion. The air inside the luminous will's bridge thrummed with the low, pulsing heartbeat of the ship's bioluminescent core, casting eerie blue, green shadows across the faces of his crew. Their faceted eyes were wide, their antennae rigid with shock. The human warships hung in the void before them, their hulls still shedding millennia of dust and ice. The Vindication loomed largest, its angular silhouette, a brutal contrast to the Zapirians' flowing, organic design. Where their vessels curved like living coral, the human fleet was all hard edges and unforgiving lines. Built not to harmonize with the void, but to conquer it. Quilex's secondary limbs trembled as he adjusted the scanners. Their power signatures, Commander. They shouldn't be functional. Their reactors are archaic, primitive fusion cores, not even quantum stabilized. But the output, his voice cracked. It's impossible. Zapkel forced himself to breathe. The human voice still echoed in his mind. Its tone neither hostile nor welcoming, just expectant. Identify, a demand, not a request. The Zapirian commander straightened, his carapace plates shifting with emotion. Open a channel. The calm officer hesitated, her bioluminescent markings flickering with unease. Sir, they're encryption protocols, a hiss of static. Then, the channel stabilized. Zapkel spoke, his voice carefully measured. This is High Commander Zapkel of the Zapirian sovereignty. We were unaware this system was inhabited. A pause, then laughter, not mocking, not cruel, just tired. Inhabited. The human's voice was rough, as if disused for centuries. That's one way to put it. Deep within the Vindication, something moved. The human fleet was waking. Lights flickered to life across their hulls. Not the steady glow of Zapirian luminescence, but harsh white illumination that cut through the dark like knives. Thrusters flared, scattering debris in slow motion arcs. The Vindication's massive rail cannons, long dormant, hummed as capacitors charged. Quilek scanners screamed. Commander, their weapon systems. Zapkel's mandibles clenched. Hold position. Do not power weapons. A gamble. But if the humans had wanted them dead, they would have fired already. The calm crackled again. Zapirian sovereignty. The human's voice was quieter now, almost thoughtful. You weren't around when we went dark. Zapkel hesitated. Our records speak of your species, but we believed you extinct. Another pause. Then, yea, a dry, hollow chuckle. That was the idea. A new alert blared across the bridge. Quilek's voice was strangled. Commander, the Vindication, it's transmitting. Data flooded their systems. Not an attack, not a virus, ancient battle logs, distress signals, and Zapkel's breath caught. The last broadcast from Earth. A grainy, fragmented transmission, its audio warped by time. A human voice, screaming over the roar of explosions. Fall back, all units, fall back. They're breaching the static. Then silence, the bridge of the luminous will was utterly still. The human's voice returned, softer now. You asked who we are, a flicker of movement on the Vindication's observation deck. A silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in armor that had once been white but was now streaked with old blood and scorch marks. We're the ones who didn't get the luxury of dying. The figure stepped into the light. Major Caroline Davis, last commander of the United Nations Strike Fleet, looked down at the Zapirian vessel with eyes that had seen 10,000 years of darkness, and smiled. Now, she said, let's talk about what really happened to humanity. The luminous will hung motionless in the void, its crystalline hull pulsing with uneasy blue-green energy. Zapkel's claws flexed against the command console, the bioluminescent veins beneath his exoskeleton flickering in agitation. The human warship, Vindication, loomed before them, a jagged silhouette against the distant starlight. It was not sleek like Zapirian vessels, not elegant in its construction. It was brutal. A relic of war, its armor pitted with ancient scars, its weapon ports dark, but unmistakably alive with dormant menace. Quilek, the ship's chief scientist, had not moved since the transmission ended. His antennae trembled, his usually precise mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. And their commander Davis had spoken as if the galaxy owed them an answer. Zapkel forced himself to exhale, the air hissing through his respiratory vents. He had studied human history. Of course, every Zapirian officer had. The species had been reckless, emotional, prone to violence. But they had also been clever, too clever. The record spoke of their wars, their stubborn refusal to surrender even when outmatched. And now, against all reason, they had returned. A soft chime echoed through the bridge. The Vindication was hailing them again. Zapkel hesitated. This was not a first contact scenario. This was something else. A reckoning. He opened the channel. The human commander's face filled the holoscreen, her features sharp under the dim lighting of her ship. Her eyes. Zapkel had never seen eyes like that. Not in any species. They were dark, yes, but there was something behind them. A weight, a depth that made his instincts recoil. "You've seen the logs," Davis said, her voice calm. Too calm. "You know what your people did." Zapkel's mandibles twitched. "The records are fragmented. The war was—" "A slaughter," she interrupted. "Not a war." Then, from the shadows behind her, another figure emerged. A human male, his armor blackened by plasma burns, his face a mask of old scars. Sergeant Nathan Emigan. He carried something in his hands, a small, hexagonal device, its surface etched with Zapirian script. Quilex made a sound, a sharp, involuntary click of alarm. "You recognize it," Davis observed. Zapkel did. It was a containment core, a Zapirian containment core, the kind used for biological payloads, Emigan said, his voice rough. "Designed to burn through DNA, leave nothing behind." The bridge of the luminous will went cold. Zapkel's mind raced. The records had been clear. Humanity had fallen to infighting, to their own hubris. There had been no genocide, no Zapirian involvement. The device in Emigan's hands was real. Davis leaned forward, her gaze unblinking. "You didn't know," she murmured. "Did you?" Zapkel felt something inside him, fracture. This was not a negotiation, it was a trap. And they had already taken the bait. The silence on the bridge of the luminous will was absolute. Zapkel's crystalline fingers flexed against the command console, the bioluminescent veins beneath his skin pulsing erratically. The containment core in Emigan's hands glowed faintly, a sickly blue-green, the same hue as Zapirian power cores, the same hue as the weapon that had scoured Earth's last cities. Quilex's antennae trembled, his compound eyes flickering with fractured light. Impossible. The records, the history, had been clear. Humanity had torn itself apart. Their extinction had been self-inflicted. A tragedy, yes, but not a crime. Not theirs. Yet the device was real. Davis watched them, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The weight of that silence was worse than any accusation. Zapkel's mind reeled. If this was true, if the High Conclave had lied, then everything he knew was a lie. The human fleet hung in the void beyond the luminous will, their ships a brutal contrast to the sleek crystalline elegance of Zapirian design. Where Zapirian vessels curved like living sculptures, the human warships were angular, armored in matte, black plating that drank in the light, no decorative flourishes, no wasted space. Only weapons. Zapkel's tactical display flickered as it struggled to parse their signatures. The humans had no energy shields, at least not in any form the scanners recognized. Instead, their hulls were layered with some kind of reactive armor, a composite that shifted under sensor probes, scattering readings like water dispersing light. Quilex hissed, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Their technology, it doesn't make sense. It shouldn't work, but it did, and worse, it was familiar. Zapkel's stomachs twisted as the realization struck him. The humans hadn't just survived, they had adapted. They had taken the shattered remnants of their civilization and reforged it in the dark, using whatever scraps they could scavenge, whatever horrors they had endured as a whetstone to sharpen themselves into something new, something dangerous. Emigan hadn't moved. The containment core rested in his palms like an offering, or a verdict. His scars gleamed under the bridge lights, old wounds that had never fully healed. Zapkel forced himself to meet the human's gaze. "Where did you find this?" Emigan's lips curled, just slightly, not a smile, something colder. "Where you left it." A memory surfaced decades, old reports of clean-up operations in the outer colonies, of bio-containment protocols enacted after rogue outbreaks. Zapkel had never questioned them. Why would he? The Conclave's word was law. Now, he wondered how many of those reports had been lies. Davis finally spoke, her voice quiet. We buried our dead, we counted them, and then we followed the trail. The trail. Footprints in the dust, radiation signatures, scorched earth where no battle had been recorded. Zapkel's breath caught. They hadn't just survived. They had been hunting outside. The human fleet shifted, not advancing, not retreating. Zapkel understood. Then, this wasn't a first contact. It was a reckoning. And the Zapirian Dominion was woefully unprepared. The silence in the crystalline command chamber was thick enough to suffocate. Zapkel's neural tendrils pulsed erratically, their usual rhythmic glow disrupted by the weight of revelation. The human fleet hung in the void beyond the viewports. Their ships, their warships, silhouetted against the distant glow of the nebula. They were not the crude, jury-rigged vessels of refugees. They were predators, and they had been watching. Quilek's luminescent markings flickered with distress as he analyzed the data streaming across the holographic displays. The human vessel's energy signatures were unlike anything in the Dominion's archives. Not the clean, controlled pulse of crystalline reactors, but something raw, a thrumming power that seemed to breathe like a living thing. Their armor was layered, not in sleek geometric plating, but in jagged, overlapping segments. Scavenged, reforged, evolved, Zapkel's mandibles tightened. This was not the work of a broken species. This was the work of survivors. The human fleet, the lead ship designated Vengeance, by the Dominion's panicked translators, was a monstrous hybrid of salvage technology and brutal innovation. Its hull bore scars, deep, molten gashes, where Dominion plasma lances had struck in the early skirmishes. Yet the damage had been sealed, not with smooth repairs, but with welded armor, as if the humans had taken the wounds and made them stronger. Along its flanks, clusters of weapon pods pulsed with an eerie crimson glow, not the refined blue-green energy of Zapirian cannons, but something cruder, hungrier. Railgun batteries, stripped from decommissioned Dominion outposts and modified to fire projectiles at speeds that shattered the Conclave's tactical predictions. And then there were the fighters, not sleek interceptors, but angular, asymmetrical craft, their wings bristling with retrofitted plasma cutters and kinetic shredders. They moved in formations the Dominion's tactical AIs couldn't parse. Not the precise geometric patterns of civilized warfare, but something fluid, alive. Like wolves circling prey, the reckoning Major Davis hadn't moved. She stood before the holodisplay, her gaze locked onto the Dominion's flagship, the luminous will. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture, rigid, controlled, spoke of something deeper than anger. Calculation. Zapkel had seen warriors before. He had commanded fleets, crushed rebellions, enforced the conclave's will across a dozen systems. But this was different. The humans weren't here to negotiate. They were here to prove something. Sergeant Emigan's voice cut through the silence, low and deliberate. You thought we were gone. Wiped out. Just another dead species in the archives. His fingers tapped the insignia on his chest. A blackened star, ringed in crimson. But we don't die easy. The Dominion had records of human history, their wars, their stubbornness, their refusal to surrender even when outmatched. But they had dismissed it as desperation, because now, as the Vengeance's engines flared, as the fighter wings shifted into attack vectors, Zapkel realized the truth. The humans hadn't just survived. They had learned. Quilek's tendrils jerked as the sensors screamed. The human fleet wasn't just waiting, they were positioning. The luminous will's tactical display flickered, recalculating as new signatures bloomed along the system's edge. More ships, emerging from the nebula's radiation haze. Not the sleek angular forms of Dominion reinforcements, but jagged, asymmetrical hulls, their silhouettes unmistakable. And they weren't just surrounding the Dominion fleet, they were herding them. Zapkels, blood ran cold. This wasn't a battle, it was a hunt, and the humans had already chosen their prey. The luminous will shuddered as its crystalline power cores pulsed erratically. Their usual rhythmic hum distorted into something jagged, like the panicked heartbeat of a cornered animal. Zapkel's claws flexed against the command console, the bioluminescent interface casting his shadow in fractured teal across the bridge. They had been so certain the Dominion's armada, gleaming, precise, a masterpiece of Zapirian engineering, had entered the system expecting relics, broken ships crewed by desperate survivors, perhaps. A final, pitiful stand, not the vengeance. Its hull, a patchwork of scars and fresh welds, its weapons humming with a resonance that made the will's sensors shriek in protest. Not the swarm of fighters, each one asymmetrical, each one wrong in ways that defied galactic design principles, moving like predators circling wounded prey. And certainly not the new arrivals. Twi'lek's tendrils flicked across the holographic display, pulling data from the nebula's edge. The signatures were faint, masked by radiation, deliberately so. The humans had hidden them. Not just ships, but something else. Something massive. A shape resolved on the screen. Zapkel's breath caught. It wasn't a warship. It was a fortress, a drifting colossus of blackened alloy and exposed superstructure, its spine broken in 3 places, its engines dark, a derelict, a graveyard. The sensors whispered of power signatures deep within its corpse. Twi'lek's voice was barely audible over the static. That's impossible. Because they recognized it. Every Zapirian did. The Titan's resolve, a Dominion supercarrier, lost centuries ago in the first purges, presumed destroyed with all hands. But here it was, and the humans had brought it with them. Major Caroline Davis exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet. The Resolve's command deck was a tomb frozen air, shattered consoles, the brittle remains of long-dead crew still strapped into their stations. But not all of them were dead. Her HUD painted the room in stark outlines. Something stirred in the shadows. A figure, slumped against a ruptured bulkhead, its form obscured by layers of frost and time. A glint of metal, a hand, skeletal and augmented, twitched lights flickered deep within the ship's corpse. The Resolve was waking up. Zapkel's mind raced. This wasn't just a trap, it was a message. The humans hadn't just survived. They had taken the Dominion's greatest weapon, their pride, and turned it against them. And now, as the Vengeance's guns locked onto the Will's engines, as the derelict supercarrier's reactors flared to monstrous life, Zapkel understood the true horror of humanity. They didn't just fight, they remembered. And they made you remember too. The air inside the derelict supercarrier tasted of iron and ozone, the metallic tang of ancient blood, the sharp sting of long dormant systems surging back to life. Caroline's breath fogged in her helmet, her HUD painting the ruined command deck in fractured outlines of red and gold. The figure in the shadows didn't move again, but she could feel it watching, or what was left of one. Frost cracked like shattered glass as the figure shifted, its movements slow, deliberate. The dim glow of emergency lights caught on exposed cybernetics, ribbons of blackened alloy fused to bone. A skeletal hand curled around the grip of a weapon older than most civilizations. Caroline's pulse hammered in her throat. She had expected corpses. Behind her, Emigan's rifle stayed leveled, his voice tight over comms. "Major," she silenced him with a gesture. The figure exhaled, a sound like rusted gears grinding, and lifted its head. The face beneath the frost was a ruin, half flesh, half machine. One eye a dull, milky white, the other a pulsing red ember embedded deep in a socket of scar tissue. The lips peeled back from teeth filed to points, or a snarl. Caroline's HUD flickered, then spat out an identification tag, ancient, corrupted, but still legible. Vault, Faith Legion, Terrace Fist, The name meant nothing to her. The Legion did. Terra's Fist hadn't existed for 500 years. The figure, Vault, tilted its head, the red eye flaring as it studied her. Then, with a sound like breaking ice, it spoke. "Took you long enough." Zapkel's claws dug into the command console as the Resolve's reactors surged to full power. The Dominion supercarrier wasn't just awake, it was hungry. Quilek's frill flared in panic as the scans updated. "Commander, the energy signatures, they're not just from the reactors." Zapkel didn't need the data to know. He could see it. The Resolve's weapon bays were opening. Not just the standard batteries, the old ones, the ones the Dominion had sealed away, the ones too monstrous even for their wars. And the humans had unlocked them. Vault moved like a thing unaccustomed to gravity, each step a shuddering mechanical lurch. Caroline kept her sidearm raised, but didn't fire. This wasn't an enemy. This was a relic, a survivor. "You're not supposed to be here," Vault rasped, the voice a distorted echo of something that had once been human. "This was a tomb. Our tomb." Caroline's jaw tightened. "We didn't know." The red eye flickered. "You do now." Then the deck shuddered as the Resolve's guns fired. Not at the Vengeance, not at the Will. At the stars themselves. The first shot tore through the void like a blade through silk, a beam of blackened light that twisted as it traveled. Zapkel's crest flattened in instinctive horror as it struck a distant Zapirian battleship, and the ship unraveled, its crystalline hull peeling apart like rotting flesh. Quilek's voice was a whisper. "That's impossible. That weapon was destroyed." Zapkel's blood ran cold. The Resolve wasn't just a ship, it was a grave, and the dead had just started digging. Vault's laughter was the sound of grinding metal. "They thought they killed us. They thought they won." Caroline's grip on her sidearm tightened. "How long have you been here?" The red eye dimmed. Long enough to forget what sunlight felt like. Then the Resolve fired again, and the galaxy remembered why it had feared humanity. The Resolve hung in the void, like a jagged wound, its blackened hull drinking in the light of distant stars. It was not a ship, not anymore. It was a corpse reanimated, a relic of a war the galaxy had tried to forget. And now, with every pulse of its impossible weapons, it reminded them all of their mistake. Zapkel's claws dug into the command console, the crystalline surface fracturing beneath his grip. His mind raced, parsing the horror unfolding before him. The humans had not just survived their extinction, they had weaponized it. The Resolve was proof. Its guns did not burn or blast. They unmade. Each shot peeled reality apart at the seams, reducing Zapirian warships to spiraling ribbons of disintegrating matter. Quilek's voice crackled over the comms, stripped of its usual clinical detachment. "The energy signature. It matches the old records. The Void Rend Project. They buried this technology. They swore it was lost." Zapkel's crest flared in agitation. Of course the humans had lied. Of course they had kept their deadliest secrets even in defeat. That was their nature, to hide knives in the dark, to turn graves into arsenals. On the view screen, the Vengeance banked hard, its thrusters flaring as it repositioned between the Resolve and the remnants of the Zapirian fleet. Major Caroline Davis was no fool. She knew what this meant. The Resolve was not here to save them. It was here to end things. Sergeant Emigan's voice cut through the silence on the human vessel's bridge, rough with disbelief. "That's a grave. Class warship. They were all supposed to be scuttled after the purge. Who the hell is flying it?" Caroline's fingers hovered over the tactical display, her expression unreadable. "Not who," she murmured. "What?" The Resolve moved with a predator's patience, its engines silent, its weapons cycling with eerie precision. It did not broadcast, it did not hail, it simply hunted. Zapkel's tactical officer hissed as another Zapirian cruiser dissolved into shimmering debris. "High Commander, we cannot engage that thing. Our shields are useless. Our hulls might as well be paper to those weapons." Zapkel knew the truth of it. The resolve was beyond them, beyond anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. But there was another truth, one that coiled like ice in his veins. The humans on the Vengeance were just as afraid. He opened a channel. Caroline's face appeared on the screen, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid. She expected demands, threats. Zapkel gave her neither. "You do not control that ship," he said, the words heavy with realization. Her silence was answer enough. Aboard the Resolve, in the hollow dark of its dead bridge, something stirred. Vault's voice, when it came, was a fractured thing, layered with static and something worse. Something old. "You thought you were the last." A pause, the red eye flickered. "You were wrong." Caroline's breath caught. The Resolve was not crewed by survivors. It was crewed by Vengeance, and it was just getting started. The Resolve moved, not with the mechanical precision of a warship, not with the cold calculation of an AI-controlled dreadnought, but with the slow, deliberate motion of something alive. Its hull pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, veins of crimson energy threading through its blackened armor like blood, through necrotic flesh. The Zapirian scanners, so finely tuned to the crystalline harmonies of their own technology, could not parse it. The readings flickered between solid matter and void, between ship and specter. Quilek's talons scraped against the console as he recoiled from the data. "It's not just modified," he whispered. "It's infected." Zapkel felt the truth of it in his bones. The Resolve was no longer a vessel. It was a wound in the fabric of space, a scar left by something the humans had tried, and failed, to kill. Aboard the Vengeance, Caroline Davis stood frozen before the flickering holoscreen. The transmission from the Resolve wasn't just audio, it was memory. Fragments of a dead world, a planet burning, a fleet. Her fleet, being torn apart not by weapons, but by shadows that moved against the stars. And then, worst of all, the silence. The silence after the screaming stopped. Sergeant Emigan's voice was rough beside her. "That's not possible. We won that battle." Caroline didn't answer, because she knew, just as Zapkel did, that they hadn't. They had survived it, and whatever had killed the rest of humanity had just found them again. The Resolve's weapons activated. Not railguns, not plasma lances, dark, jagged things that unfolded from its hull like broken ribs, lashing out toward the Zapirian fleet. Where they struck, ships didn't explode, they rotted. Hulls crumbled into rust, energy cores dimmed and died. Crews, Zapkel watched, sickened, as a crystalline frigate dissolved into dust, its crew still screaming inside their failing suits. This wasn't war. This was consumption. Quilek's voice was hollow. "We cannot fight this." Zapkel knew he was right, but as the Resolve turned its bleeding gaze toward the Vengeance, he also knew the humans would try anyway, because that was what they did. That was all they had left. Caroline's fingers tightened around the command console. She had no plan, no hope, just a promise. One she had made to the dead. Emigan met her eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The Vengeance's engines flared to life. It wasn't a retreat. It was a charge. And as the last human warship flew toward the thing that had killed its people, Zapkel realized, with dawning horror, what he was truly witnessing. Not a battle. The Resolve opened its maw, and the void screamed back. The Vengeance burned through the void like a dying star, its engines bleeding plasma, as it hurled itself toward the Resolve. Caroline Davis watched the distance between them shrink, her fingers locked around the edge of the command console. The numbers on the tactical display flickered, too fast, too close. They weren't going to make it. She knew that. But that had never stopped humans before. Zapkel's frigate, the Luminous Will, hung broken in the black, its crystalline hull cracked open like an egg, leaking blue-green energy into the vacuum. His claws scraped against the command chair as he forced himself to watch. The Resolve loomed ahead, an abomination of living metal and stolen flesh. its surface writhing with the remnants of consumed ships, their hulls half digested into its mass. And the Vengeance, small, battered, impossibly defiant, was flying straight into its jaws. Quilek's voice was a whisper over the comms. "They're not retreating." Zapkel's crest flattened against his skull. No, they were doing something worse. They were attacking. Imogen didn't flinch as the proximity alarm shrieked. His hands moved over the weapons console, fingers dancing between controls with the ease of a man who had long since accepted death. The Vengeance's railguns cycled, charged, locked onto the Resolve's pulsing core. "Major," he said, voice steady. Caroline didn't look away from the viewport. "Fire." The ship shuddered as the guns unleashed, hypervelocity slugs streaking through the dark, punching into the Resolve's flesh. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wounds screamed. Tendrils of blackened matter lashed out from the impact points, writhing as if in agony. The Resolve's surface convulsed, its stolen hull, plates buckling inward. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But they fired again anyway. Zapkel's breath caught. The humans weren't just fighting, they were hurting it. The Resolve had consumed entire fleets without resistance. It had torn through Zapirian defenses like they were nothing. But this insignificant ship, this last ragged gasp of a dead species was making it bleed. Quilek's voice was raw with disbelief. How? Zapkel had no answer, only the terrible dawning realization that the galaxy had been wrong about humans from the very beginning. They hadn't been weak. They hadn't been reckless. They had simply been waiting. Caroline's console flashed red. The Resolve's maw yawned open, a vortex of distorted space and screaming light. The Vengeance's engines howled, straining against the pull, but it was too late. The ship shuddered, its hull groaning as the abyss reached for it. Imogen's hands never stopped moving. "One more volley," Caroline ordered. The guns fired. The Resolve shrieked, not the cold, sterile glow of Zapirian luminescence, not the sickly pulse of the Resolve's stolen energy. A detonation ripped through the void, a sunburst of raw, unfiltered destruction. The Vengeance was gone, swallowed, consumed, but its final act had been a spark in the dark. The Resolve convulsed, its surface split, and from the wound, something new emerged. Zapkel's claws dug into his chair. Hundreds of vessels, their hulls scarred but unbroken, their engines burning with the same impossible defiance as the Vengeance. Human ships, living ships, and at their head, a single vessel, its prow carved with a name that sent a shock through Zapkel's spine. Quilek's voice was barely audible. They were never extinct. Zapkel's crest rose in slow, horrified understanding. The humans hadn't been wiped out. They had been hiding. Now they had returned. Caroline Davis opened her eyes. The last thing she remembered was light. A hand on her shoulder, she turned. Imogen stood beside her, his face unreadable. Beyond him, the bridge of the Retribution hummed to life. A voice crackled over the comms. "Welcome back, Major." She exhaled and smiled. The Resolve screamed. The humans answered, and the galaxy burned. The silence after the storm, the Resolve's wreckage tumbled through the void, its crystalline spires shattered, its bioluminescent cores flickering like dying stars. The battle had lasted less than an hour to break a fleet that had ruled the stars for millennia. Zapkel stood motionless on the observation deck, his claws curled against the transparent alloy, as he watched the aftermath unfold. The human armada hung in formation, their engines idling, their weapons still humming with residual charge. They did not advance, they did not gloat. They simply waited. A transmission flickered to life across the Resolve's ruined comms array. No demands, no ultimatums, just a single looping message. "We are still here." 3 words. 3 words that unraveled everything the Zapirians had believed. Quilek let out a shuddering breath. "They could have destroyed us." Zapkel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was carved into the broken hulls drifting between the fleets. The humans had held back. They had chosen to, On the bridge of the Retribution, Caroline Davis watched the same scene through the tactical display. The Zapirian survivors were regrouping, their formations ragged, their energy signatures weak. She could give the order, one more volley, and the war would be over. Imogen's voice cut through her thoughts. They're retreating, she exhaled, long and slow, not yet. A hand tapped at the console beside her. A new transmission, this one directed not at the Zapirians, but at the scattered human colonies still clinging to life in the dark. Stand by for coordinates, the message repeated, pulsing across every frequency, every hidden relay, every buried receiver. Somewhere, in the ruins of a dead world, a console flickered to life. Somewhere, in the depths of a derelict station, a long-dormant engine groaned awake. Somewhere, a child looked up at the sky and saw the first ship descending. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in a century, humanity was no longer alone, and the galaxy would remember.